Professor Sharona Gordon is a faculty member in physiology and biophysics here in the School of Medicine. She runs a very, very active lab, the Gordon Lab, and she's also remarkably, she also is editor-in-chief of the Journal of General Physiology. And she has a deep commitment to trainees. She's just, on her own, has started a training program for postdocs called Hit the Ground Running, helping to prepare them for academic careers. And so we've just had a lot of respect for her work, and I invite her to come to the podium. Thank you. That should be on now.
Okay. Maybe I'll just, can you guys hear me? Yeah, in the back you can hear me? Great. So I'm hoping this will be a little bit more of a discussion today. My understanding is that every other presentation that you've seen has been kind of a lecture with slides. Is that right? I don't have any slides, okay? So this is really going to be, I hope, personal, because what you're going to hear is not some universal, yes? Okay. A little bit more. Does that make a difference? Oh, maybe too much of a difference. Okay. So it's going to be my opinions and my views based on experience, but you know, the global topic is integrity, and we all have our own moral compass. For example, I consider myself to be a very ethical person, but sometimes I drive above the speed limit. Anybody else drive above the speed limit sometimes? And it's become especially clear to me now because I have a daughter who's learning how to drive. She's almost 16. And she's constantly pointing out, you know, you didn't signal, you're going too fast. And I believe in the rule of law. I believe that there's a speed limit for a reason. I believe I should adhere to it just like anybody else. But there are other people who have, in general, the same values who just won't speed. Anybody like that in here just won't speed? Okay, nonetheless, I believe those people are out there. So when it comes to peer review, you know, I could give you a seminar on how to be a good peer reviewer, be objective, but instead what we're going to do today is talk about what's wrong with peer review, because the problems that I see in peer review are not ones that you can fix. They're systemic problems. And so you can be as objective as you want and timely and constructive, and that's great. You should try to do that, but you know that already. You know not to use, you know, mean names and say that an author is stupid. But the bigger problems are ones that you might look at and think, I can't do anything about them. And so what I hope you get by the end of today is, even though as a peer reviewer of a journal or of a grant, in that role you may not be able to do anything about the ethical problems in peer review, but that in the other aspects of your role as a scientist you really can. So who wants to tell me what are the things that are wrong with peer review? What's the problem? Yeah.
Well, I was just talking with one of my colleagues today about how some journals blind everything to both the reviewers and the the submitter. And some the reviewers see who submitted the paper, and we think that could sometimes bias. If it's a well-known research group or something, that could bias how the paper's treated in peer review.
So benefit of the doubt for established investigators could buy them some favorable bias in peer review. Okay, what else? Yeah.
You have a large multidisciplinary research team. It might be hard to get reviewers that can cover all the aspects of the paper fairly.
Yeah, that's a big one, and we'll get more to that. What he said is that papers can have many different approaches and techniques in them, and any given reviewer isn't qualified to cover all of those different areas. So in summary, it's a hard job. Yeah. Wow, I didn't even come up with that one, but you're right, is that you have to squeeze it in kind of on the side along with all your other duties, so it's not recognized as a separate paid element in your job. That's a great one. Yeah.
There's measurement errors between the reviewers, so there might happen to have consistency or a hard set of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Uneven reviews, and even the same reviewer caught on different days might put in more time to it than on other days. Might be in a good mood or a bad mood. Yeah.
The people who are often the best qualified to review your work are usually your direct scientific competitors.
And
that poses an inherent conflict.
okay, so let me repeat that for the video, which is that if the people who are best qualified to review your papers are your direct competitors, that might represent a conflict of interest, and you might not want them reviewing your papers. So the problem there is that you're excluding the most qualified reviewers because of a fear of competition. Yeah.
The flip side of that might be that people who are qualified are people you work with, and therefore there's other kind of conflict of interest where they might be too lenient.
Absolutely, and that's really a hard and fast rule for most journals, that they disqualify people that you've published with over the last X years or people that you've trained with. Yep. Yeah.
Findings of the paper could affect the reviewers of your competitors, could negatively affect their ability to acquire funding. That could be a financial conflict.
So to make sure I understand, if the reviewer
Is writing a grant,
okay.
If the findings of the paper
If the findings of a paper will make the reviewer's future or current grant proposals or even papers more difficult to get through the system, they might be less inclined to look at it positively or drag it out. I'll tell you what oh yeah, back there.
So a corollary to that one is, they'll steal your science, and they can't cite you. But they'll learn something that's going to get a competitive advantage because they read your paper before anybody else.
So I'm going to summarize that as cynicism, right? The risk that anonymous reviewer would use what's in a manuscript to their advantage before everybody else has access to it. So I'll tell you the answer I was looking for. I was hoping that somebody would stand up and say, I am the problem with peer review. Does anybody want to admit to that? Okay, so let's say somebody did, and I'd say, well, you're the problem with peer review? And what I would say to that is that we need to think about the system that got peer review to where it is now. And so to do that, we need to think about the papers that people are reviewing, and we need to think about the grants that funded those papers, and we need to think about the individual scientists that wrote the grants and the scientists that did the work, and further and further and further back. And so where are the problems? Well, I think we can really look at the results, and the results that I'm thinking of are a bit of a shift from the direction that many of you have brought up, but what you've brought up are serious issues. So who here feels confident that they're going to get offers for an academic position after their postdoc? I see a hand. It's okay. It's good to be confident. Go you. How many people live in fear? Yeah. That's the problem with peer review. right? So the consequence of what's going wrong with peer review is that we have an audience full of the best and the brightest. You're at the University of Washington, the best place to do research, maybe in the world, my lab especially. And we have people, most of whom are on training grants, which are selective. They always have many applicants for each slot. And so you guys are an elite, and yet you're full of uncertainty and doubt about whether you can meet your goals. Not that everybody's goal is to be an academic researcher, but for those for whom it is, that's, you know, a serious issue. It's not just a quality of life issue for now. It's what if it doesn't happen, then it's an even bigger quality of life issue. And I would posit that the root of that uncertainty is at least in part common to what's wrong with the peer review process. So raise your hand if you've, and wait till I finish the question, if you've never had a paper in Nature or Science or PNAS or eLife or Cell or Neuron. That's the problem with peer review, right? That we've given away the power to evaluate good science, which I would call peer review, to other parties. So what do I mean by that? I'm editor-in-chief of a journal called Journal of General Physiology. You won't be surprised that it's the best physiology journal in the world. It's a relatively small journal. It's fairly specialized. And it's published by the Rockefeller University Press. So as editor-in-chief of this journal, who do you think I work for? Say that again? Your peers. Oh my God, you're a genius. Yes, I work for you, right? And so I'm not a paid employee of the Rockefeller University Press. I probably spend about 20 hours a week, plus the nightmare time, but I can't count that. Working to make the journal better, working to recruit good papers, working to help junior authors through the process. And I'm not an employee. I get paid by the state of Washington to be a professor here. And so I don't see myself as working for the Rockefeller University Press. They do pay me an honorarium, but you know, it's not much. So I work for you. So the editor-in-chief of Nature, who does that person work for? Nature Publishing Group, that's right. And what's their goal? What? Money, that's right. Profits. So my point here is that an independent journal or a society journal that has an active scientist calling the shots is going to have motives that are very, very different, maybe even altruistic motives. In contrast, a for-profit journal is going to be run by people who report to their owners or their shareholders, and so their motive in publishing is to make money. Do you guys want to be the labor so that the people who own Nature Publishing Group can buy another boat? I don't. I want to buy my own boat. But that won't happen as editor of a journal. So who can tell me, why would someone choose to submit a paper to Nature? Yeah.
Because other members of their field hold those publications in higher esteem.
Great answer, because other people in their field hold those journals like Nature in high esteem. And so you submit there to get the attention of the people in your field and to get some sort of stamp of approval that you've published in this high prestige journal. Does that capture what you meant? Why else? Yeah.
Has a really broad readership.
Great, yeah, it's got a broad readership. So Journal of General Physiology, if I were to pick up the print version, which I don't get, and leaf through it, I would see papers on the broad topic of physiology, but if that were the primary way that people access papers, somebody in a different field wouldn't know about my work. Yeah.
Career advancement, if you were publishing in a widely esteemed or viewed journal, then maybe your superiors might view that as conditions for advancement.
So promotion, hiring, advancement in your career, the perception that publishing in one of these vanity journals is going to be of real value to you in moving on to the next step in your career. I think those are all exactly right. And so now I'm going to focus on that last one, that publishing in a high-profile journal will advance your career. And I'm not going to say that isn't true. I'm going to take that as an assumption. It will advance your career, or at least the probability that your career will advance the way you want it to. Why is that? Why is publishing in one of those journals good for your career? Yeah.
It's shorthand for your CV or when you describe your accomplishments that you've done good work, that you're making a splash, and when you list your publications, people don't actually read them and evaluate your quality as a researcher. They look at the year in the publication journal and decide if there's a good track record or not.
So to summarize that, I'll just say that scientists are lazy. They want a shorthand so that they don't have to personally evaluate your papers. They don't have to read them. They cede that role to someone else. And so who are they ceding it to? Who's making the decision for Nature? Yeah. Raise your hand if you agree that it's the peer reviewers that make the decision. No one agrees with you. Who makes the decision? The editors, that's right. And what's their training? Have the editors, do they have PhDs? Often. They often have PhDs. Have they done postdocs? Sometimes they've done postdocs. Have they run labs? Very, very rarely. So I'm not saying that professional editors aren't good at their jobs. I'm not saying that they don't have good judgment. What I'm saying is that they're not active scientists. So they get the reports in from the peer reviewers, and what their reports say is somewhat a matter of luck, because did they pick somebody that's an admirer of yours, or did they pick somebody who's never really thought your approach was going to get anywhere? And they get these reports, and then they make a decision, and what's their target goal from this decision? What are they hoping to get out of it? I can't hear you. Profits, that's right. So the decision about whether to accept your paper is based somewhat on the reports. Peer reviewers have to give, at least a certain level of enthusiasm. But beyond that, it's just based on whether they think this is going to make money for their owners and shareholders. How did we let this happen? We let this happen. Not so much you guys because you're young, but your PIs let this happen. And the only way it's going to change is if each of us assumes responsibility for this problem in the system. And so instead of talking about how to be a good peer reviewer, what terms are considered objective and what terms might have an editor view you as somebody with an axe to grind, I'm not going to talk about that. Because in the end, it's not generally, the decision's not generally made or not exclusively made based on the quality of reviews that you would write. So has anybody here ever gotten reviews back on a paper to which they've contributed where the decision didn't seem to align with what the reviews said? And so was the decision ever better? Yeah, no, right. Sometimes you get back pretty decent reviews. And they say, well, we're going to reject your paper. And what editors have to hide behind is confidential comments. They can say to you, well, yes, what they wrote to you, what the reviewers told you was the good stuff, but I can't tell you what they told me in confidence. They may have filled out confidential comments. That's just bullshit. Sorry if I said that on the video. For this process to work, we all have to be on the same team and have the same goal. And the goal has to be doing the best science we can possibly do. Not feeling better than you because I can trash your paper, not making profits for shareholders, but doing the best science possible. And opaque steps allow professional editors who really aren't qualified to make the decision, whose incentives to make the decision don't align with the goals of our community to do the best science. It allows that system to really hijack the quality of our science. I'm not going to give away my power to evaluate postdocs based on what journal editors thought of the work they did in graduate school. Are you kidding me? I'm going to read those papers. When my department is hiring faculty, am I going to let the editor of Nature do the first call and tell me who I should be interviewing? Of course not. But I seem to be an exception. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to come talk to you today is because you're the hope for the future. It's not me, it's not people of my generation, it's not the old white guys who are more senior on the faculty, it's you. It's each and every one of you. And the future doesn't depend on you because you can use more objective words when you write your reviews. The future depends on you because you have power and you don't even know it. To me, it's just remarkable when I talk to trainees that all they see is the power imbalance, which is, I acknowledge, enormous, between faculty and students and faculty and postdocs. They see the disparity in security. You know, postdocs and students are giving everything to their job without getting either really recognition or compensation that is meaningful. And that power imbalance, I think, clouds the rest of what you see. It makes it just too easy to not see that without trainees, we have nothing. So I was in graduate school a long time ago in another century, and I didn't know that I had any power, right? I felt like I was the leaf on the stream, the feather in the wind. I didn't have control over my destiny, and that was also true. But I think it's very worthwhile to look at the decisions that every one of you makes on a regular basis about your careers and ask whether those decisions are one that allow you to keep your power or whether you're giving it away. So the harder side of the coin is the perception that where you publish affects your career. The easier side of the coin, I think, the more changeable side of the coin, at least in the short term, is evaluating science. That you can, when you pick up a paper, ignore where it's published. So who here gets an electronic table of contents from any journal? Okay, stop doing that. Right? You're letting the editors of those papers determine what papers you're going to see, the editor of those journals to determine the papers you'll see. What's another way that you can make sure that you see the papers that are important for you? Let's see, who hasn't answered yet? In Navy, right there. Google Scholar, excellent. Google. So the way that science and nature got to be so important is because in the old days, when this was only maybe the first paper I ever published, was written on a typewriter. And we'd use carbon copies, so there'd be a piece of film in between the pieces of paper that would transfer the typewritten letters from one piece of paper to another. It was very high tech. And we sent it out by mail in, triplicate or quadruplicate. And the journal editors, they'd get it in the mail, and they'd think about who might be a good reviewer. And they'd send them a letter through the Postal Service, and they'd say, here's some information about this paper. Are you willing to review it? And the scientist who was asked to review would write a letter and put it back in the mail and answer about whether they would or wouldn't be willing to review it. And at some point, the packet containing the manuscript would go out to the reviewers. They'd read it eventually, they'd get out their typewriters, they'd write up a review, and they'd send it back in the mail. And it took a really long time. On the order of a year or more was not unusual. And this was for a paper that wouldn't necessarily require many revisions, right? So that kind of lead time was just built in for every paper. What Science and Nature did is they say, you know what, we're going to publish frequently and we're going to publish fast. And so that was their goal, that was their metric, and they worked on it for years, and they got it down to maybe just a few months. And the reason that Science was more popular as a place to publish in the US than Nature was because you had to put stuff in the mail overseas if you wanted to submit to Nature, and that just took longer. So what happened that revolutionized publishing? Yeah, the internet, the web, email. All of that lead time, all of that sending things in the mail. Let's say I have a paper as an editor that I want to send out for review. I don't have to ask 2 people or 3 people, wait till I hear from them all and then see who else I should ask. I can send out one invitation when I figure out who should go to. I can send out another. I don't have to wait until I hear both answers. I can send out a third. There's no synchronization of postal delivery required, and so it's much, much faster. I can also pick up the phone. So when I was 10 years old, I went to summer camp in Toronto, outside Toronto. I'm from the Midwest, and this was not only kind of far away from the Midwest, but it was in another country. And I made a really good friend, and when I came back home, I had that friend's phone number, and I wanted to call her, and my parents said, well, you can make a 3-minute call, because back then long distance was a few dollars a minute, and a few dollars was a lot of money. And so the phone has also revolutionized our ability to connect with people and to do it in rapid and efficient ways. So is there any reason to prefer Science and Nature anymore from an expediency point of view? No. Other journals are just as fast. The Journal of General Physiology, we get first decisions out with a mean of 32 days. And I think that's pretty common. About a month from when you send in a manuscript, you can expect to have a decision. That's really fast. So there's no technical reasons why many journals can't do it really fast. So why are people still sending their work to these for-profit publishing machines? And it's because what a lot of you said. You want to have it broadly seen, but that's not really so true anymore because you can just do Google searches. You can set up a little script in PubMed to send you an email once a week or more frequently with what new papers have come out based on your search terms. It's really easy. It's easy to find information these days. And so all that's really left is the prestige factor, the vanity factor. So you can do something to the way you evaluate science, but what can you do about the way people who you want to hire you evaluate science? Who has ideas? Over there. Okay, nobody's raising. Okay, over there.
You could send them PDFs of the actual manuscript.
You could to your peers?
To the people that you're applying for jobs.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you can send them your work and hope that, you know what, maybe they would, on first instinct, look at the shorthand of where you publish, but if you send them the paper, maybe they'll find it, or maybe they'll read it. What else do you think you can do? Yeah. So you can put down other metrics that are more specific to your paper. So not just a metric for the journal in general, but a metric for your paper of how many times it was cited, for example. Yep, you can do that. Yeah.
People are using other social media, ResearchGate, one that comes to mind, Scopus is another, Twitter is another. People are, using their own networks to disseminate their work, and even though it may be in a non-high impact journal, but they can still do the dissemination and get it out to their own specific audience.
That's a great answer. So you can use the power of the internet and social media and networking to get your message out. So if you publish some really cool work in a society journal where its shorthand is, okay when people look at it, you can advertise your paper. And I'm going to use a word that you may have heard with respect to the people who are powerless, trying to pool their power together to accomplish something for their collective good. You can organize. So social media, that's one way to organize. ResearchGate is an example, but even Facebook and Twitter can help you get the word out. You can have networks of people out there who download your paper so that you can say, my paper was downloaded 10,000 times, my paper went viral on Twitter. But what other ways do you think you might be able to organize? You guys are feeling powerless, right? Yeah. Absolutely. You could form a collective that uses the voice of postdocs in your lab or your department, the medical school, the university, and make a statement. Say, we vow to only publish in this journal or to not publish in that journal. Or even, we collectively agree that we are going to evaluate papers based on what's in them rather than where they're published. And there is a collective organization that has done that. It was organized by the American Society of Cell Biology in 2012. And they put out a document called the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, DORA. You can look at DORA online and you can become a signator. And that, in a small way anyway, makes you part of a collective that's made a statement if you agree with what's in the statement. One of my points is that I can't really tell you how you can use your collective power to make change, that's something that you have to do for yourselves. So you as an individual can say, I'm not going to publish in for-profit journals. And if you did that, more power to you, that's great. But to make an impact on the systemic problems that are really standing between you and your goals of high-powered research positions or really great teaching positions, anything that requires a strong CV with strong publications, what's standing in the way is something that you can do something about if you use your power collectively. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question? It's sort of the corollary. You're making an argument here to the trainees in the room that they should not be sending their publications to these vanity journals. That's what I'm hearing you say. Is the corollary that those of us who are asked to review the work of our peers that have been submitted to vanity journals, should we also be, if we want to minimize the influence of these venues, should we be refusing to be service peer reviewers for those journals? How should we think about our responsibilities in that?
So that's a great question, and I would go back to the speed at which I drive and remember that, I might think it's okay to go 5 miles above the speed limit. Somebody else might think it's okay to go 50 miles above the speed limit. And so in some sense, it's a very personal answer. But I think that the approach that's worked for me is to figure out what are my values, and then to check the reasons that I do something, the reason that I do everything against my values, and make sure that there's alignment between my values and my actions. And so the reason that people review for high-profile journals is, first of all, as an ego boost, right? It means that somebody thought well of them. It's a way to get the editors of that journal familiar with who you are. It's a way to get to look at somebody else's work before it's published. But it's also making money for for-profit journals. And so I'd say that's a really personal decision, and there are many scientists I respect who are on boards of for-profit journals and review for for-profit journals, and who submit and publish in for-profit journals. And so I don't think things are black and white. And I think that boycotting globally all for-profit journals without first developing other strategies to get the importance of your work out to the world would have a lot of risk associated with it, and most people aren't that tolerant of risk. And so really what I'm suggesting is that you wake up and think about who's profiting from your work, and think about what makes you proud about your scientific career, and what you want to accomplish, and what you hold dear, and just make sure that your actions align with your values. Yeah.
So I think the ultimate motivation for these journals, to publish in these journals, really have to do with the reviews of your own accomplishments going on in the departments that you work for, or when you apply for a job, the universities that you're applying for, and in the study sessions of your grants that you're applying for. Because ultimately, if you can get grants, oftentimes that person receives for your papers as well. So
So there are definitely systemic problems. I think we all agree on that. There are really systemic problems. So what do you think is standing in the way of the institutions fixing those systemic problems? Why isn't NIH saying, well, we will not have you put down where you published your paper, or we're going to instruct peer reviewers that they actually have to read the papers and we'll give them a test to make sure they read the papers? Why isn't that enforced? Why is there that change not happening? Yeah. So it'd be hard. That's certainly one reason. Yeah.
The primary mission of the NIH is not to promote good science and create knowledge, it's to affect the health of the population.
So there are definitely some people at the NIH who believe that, but there are others that believe their money will be better spent if they can improve science as a whole.
There's also, I mean, while you have your for-profit journals, you also have your open access journals, which haven't gone through peer review, and should those be treated the same if you're blinding from all journals?
Open access isn't the same as not peer reviewed. Open access just means that you don't have to buy a subscription. But there are certainly, boy, there's all kinds of journals. There's predatory journals. But to get back to why it is, yeah.
Oh, well, your question is why is it so hard?
Why aren't things changing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One reason is that the people of the most power in that system have already benefited from it.
That's exactly right. It's my fault. Right? I'm at the top. I get a benefit by having papers on my CV that are published in high-profile journals. Why would I want that to change? Not only does it benefit me, but people listen to me because I'm senior, I've got grants already, and so I can influence policy. Was there a question back there? That's what they want you to think. Oh, sorry. The point is that isn't it really the job of more senior people who have the power to make that change? The junior people don't have the power, so what can you do about it anyway? Is that? That's right. Yeah, so let me tell you about an experiment that the Howard Hughes Medical Institute did now over 10 years ago. So at the time, they had maybe 120 investigators, and one of the administrators really, was talking to Harold Varmus at the time. He was head of NIH, and they both really believed that we were giving away too much power to professional editors, to for-profit publishing machines. And so he said, you know what, I think that we should tell all of our investigators to stop publishing in those journals and to only publish in journals that make the work freely available right away. So any profit-making journal would be out. And they got together their investigators, they held a number of different meetings. Those people, they could have done it, right? They could have led the way and shown leadership in reforming academic publishing. And it wasn't uniformly true that they wanted to just keep the status quo that they were benefiting from. There was segregation of how people felt about it based on age. The more junior investigators thought, wow, that's actually a really good idea. We can be the change we want to see in the world. We can make the system more of a meritocracy. And the senior people would not accept it. And so you certainly can't say that there's the word should. Senior faculty, the ones who've benefited from the system, they should be leading the way in reform. And you get to make a choice about whether you become one of those people that reinforces the status quo, or whether you figure out how to leverage the power that you have at every stage to make change. And until we solve these systemic problems, the perverse incentives for publishing papers in high-profile journals rather than rigorous, thorough, correct science, it only benefits the senior people. So who would like to share some thoughts about that? Yeah.
So isn't it a problem that it requires everybody to play by the rules of this work? So the people that go ahead and publish in the big journals are the ones that are then going to get the jobs that allow them to gain their power. And those of us that maintain our principles don't get those jobs and then are out of science. It's really difficult to enact change if it's not a universal thing. But at the same time, though, even if we all play by the same rules, we're still competing against each other. So it's hard to say how that's going to happen unless we have some kind of agreement. But I think
Unless you organize. Yeah, so the question was, if people aren't all playing by the same rules, even if everyone at the University of Washington or everyone on the West Coast vowed to only publish in nonprofit journals, you would just lose out because everybody on the East Coast and in the middle of the country would still be publishing in Nature and Cell, and so those people would get hired and you would be left on the side of the road. So what I would say to that is that it requires developing other ways of getting the word out about your work. Go to meetings and talk about your work. Send people emails when you see a paper that you like, that you've read, and say, I thought this was really interesting because, and tell them how it bears on what you do. Have your advisor, ask your advisor to tell people about your work when they go out and about, and maybe even to suggest you for speaking roles at meetings. It requires developing networks and infrastructures, but it also requires that when you do get power, because I'm not going to tell anyone here, don't publish in Nature. That's really, a very personal thing, like how fast you're going to drive. And it's not black and white. But however you get your job, whether it's in part because you publish in high-profile journals or whether it isn't, when you're in a position to evaluate other people's science, read it. Don't give away that decision power. Don't give away that screening power. And that's why you guys are the most important people at this university when it comes to reforming publishing and peer review, is because there's still a chance that you might, when you get into a reviewing role, that you'll actually review the quality of the work. Yeah.
It sort of seems like a point that we haven't really talked about yet. Is like, as a reviewer, we need to focus on what the work is and how good it is, not like how flashy it is or how not, in vogue or sexy or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
This topic might be.
Yeah. So even among nonprofit journals, every journal has their own standard. Some want a conceptual advance and will instruct their reviewers about that. Some want mechanistic insight. And so as a reviewer, you can stand up and say, I think this deserves publishing. It's okay for reviewers to have different standards for different journals. There might be a manuscript, for example, that is purely a replication of earlier work. And many journals wouldn't publish that, and I think many reviewers would be fair and appropriate in saying, that's not right for this journal. And so again, it's a matter of the gray area, but you're right. As a reviewer, you can follow your conscience on what you feel is appropriate for a given journal. Is there a question over there?
I'd like to make a comment. So incentive of for-profit journals being to make money, they like studies that make a big splash, right? That have big relevance and so on. It turns out that those studies are also the ones with the highest retraction rate.
Yep.
So it could be a bit of a self-correcting problem in that the papers that are published in those journals are viewed as maybe of high importance, but also not as reliable and thorough. And so I actually ran into that last year. Somebody was reviewing a Nature paper and they said, oh, well, this is one of the soft science papers in Nature. And I said, soft science is supposed to be one of the best journals. And they said, well, maybe they're important studies, but they're not particularly thorough. So now that the generation is shifting and more of the people that are aware of that are coming into positions that are going to hire people, maybe they'll look at that and say, well, that's great to have papers in Nature, but let's look at your other activities too.
So that's a great point. So to summarize, papers in high-profile journals often get into those high-profile journals by making a very strong conclusion, and the stronger, the less conservative a conclusion you make in your paper, the more likely it is that you'll be wrong. And the bigger the incentive to publish in one of those journals, the higher the probability that people will either cheat or just have wishful thinking about what data they select. And so maybe those journals are now getting a reputation as having papers that have a high probability of being wrong. I haven't seen that dissuade anyone yet from publishing in those journals. That would be great, though. Yet, yes. Okay, so it looks like it's time to wrap up.